Have you ever spoken words so thoughtlessly that they become a physical weight you carry? Careless syllables that echo in your memory, growing heavier with each repetition? It's just a phrase. Man up. Two small words tossed out impatiently one evening. A dismissal more than advice. But since that day, those words have become the heaviest burden I'll ever bear. My name is Jason. I'm 35, and this begins on an ordinary Friday in February. The kind where winter seems endless, where darkness falls too early, where everyone is counting the days until spring. The kind of evening that should have been unremarkable. The kind you'd never imagine would become the dividing line of your life. Eric was my younger brother. 3 years between us. Close enough to be companions, but far enough to be different. Me, practical and driven. Him, creative and sensitive. We grew up competing, then grew into adults who called each other weekly, who gathered for holidays, who remained connected despite the different paths our lives had taken. That Friday, we met at Murphy's, the pub halfway between my office downtown and his apartment in the Arts District. A tradition we'd maintained for years. End-of-week beers, catching up on each other's lives, maintaining the connection that had sometimes frayed but never broken since childhood. I arrived late, the way I often did. A last client call running long. Emails that couldn't wait until Monday. The usual excuses. Eric was already at our usual corner table, nursing a beer, staring out the window at pedestrians hurrying through the cold. "Sorry I'm late," I said, shrugging off my coat and sliding into the booth. "Hamilton account is a nightmare this week." Eric nodded, a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "No problem. I ordered your usual." Our conversation followed familiar patterns at first. My work challenges, his latest art commission, mutual friends, plans for our parents' anniversary in April. But something felt off. Eric was quieter than usual, his responses delayed, his laughter less frequent. "Everything okay?" I finally asked. Halfway through my second beer, he hesitated, his fingers tracing patterns in the condensation on his glass. "Yeah, I guess. Just..." He paused, looking up briefly before his eyes slid away again. "I don't know. I don't feel like myself lately." There was an opening in those words, an invitation to go deeper, to ask what he meant, to really listen. But I was already checking my watch, already thinking about the dinner plans I had with Melissa later, already half distracted by a work problem I hadn't resolved before leaving the office. "Maybe you're just working too hard," I offered, the response automatic. "That sculpture series for the hospital lobby, you've been putting in crazy hours." "It's not that," he said, his voice quieter now. "It's more like, I don't know how to explain it. Everything feels heavier somehow, like I'm moving through fog." Something in his tone should have alerted me. The way he struggled to find words. The unusual vulnerability from my brother who typically kept his deeper feelings protected beneath humor and deflection. Instead, I felt a flash of impatience. We didn't do this. Emotional conversations, expressions of weakness. That wasn't our dynamic, wasn't how we were raised. "Come on, man," I said, the words coming out harsher than I intended. "Everyone goes through rough patches. You just need to man up and push through it." He flinched slightly, so briefly I almost missed it, then nodded, a tight movement that spoke volumes I couldn't hear at the time. "Yeah, you're right," he said, straightening his shoulders with visible effort. "Just a slump. I'll get over it." The conversation shifted then, back to safer territory. Sports, movies, the new brewery opening downtown. Eric laughed at my jokes, asked about Melissa's new job, all the right responses in all the right places. But something had changed in that moment. A door closed that I hadn't recognized was open. A hand reaching out that I had unthinkingly slapped away. When we parted ways outside the pub, our usual quick hug felt stiffer than normal. "See you next Friday?" I asked, already turning toward my car. "Sure," he replied, hands deep in his coat pockets against the cold. "Have a good weekend, Jace." "You too," I called over my shoulder, keys already in hand, mind already on my dinner plans. That was the last time I saw him, the last conversation we ever had, the last chance I would ever have to respond differently to words that were braver than I understood at the time. The call came Sunday morning as I was making coffee, Melissa still asleep upstairs. Eric's roommate Ryan, his voice strange and tight. Words that didn't make sense at first. Words that couldn't possibly be true. The next hours unfolded in a blur of disbelief and mounting horror. The drive to his apartment, too fast yet somehow taking forever. Police cars, neighbors gathered on the sidewalk. Ryan's ashen face as he met me at the door. What followed exists in my memory as fragments, disconnected images without continuity. Forms I signed without comprehending. Questions I couldn't properly answer. Calls I made to our parents that destroyed their world with each ring of the phone. In the days after, as arrangements were made and relatives arrived and the impossible reality slowly solidified, I moved through necessary motions without fully inhabiting them. Chose a suit he would have hated for him to wear. Selected photos for a memorial display. Wrote an eulogy full of childhood memories and adult accomplishments, carefully curated to present a life well lived rather than a life cut short. It wasn't until I was alone in his apartment sorting through his belongings that the full weight of my failure crashed down on me. His sketchbooks full of increasingly dark imagery. His journal, where he had documented his struggle with words he couldn't say aloud. The appointment card for a therapist he had never made it to, scheduled for the Monday after our Friday night beers. And a letter, sealed in an envelope with my name on it, left on his desk. The last communication from my brother. Words he couldn't speak directly to me. Jason, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I tried to reach out, tried to find the words. Came closest last night at Murphy's, but couldn't get past your dismissal. It's not your fault. We were never taught the language for this. Dad's shake it off and Mom's look on the bright side didn't leave much room for the darkness I've been carrying. I don't blame you. How could you know what I was really asking for when I barely understood it myself? When I've spent years perfecting the art of appearing fine? Please tell Mom and Dad it's not because of anything they did or didn't do. Tell Ryan he was the best roommate and friend I could have asked for. Tell Sophia I'm sorry I won't be finishing her portrait. And know that I love you, big brother. Always have. Even when we were at each other's throats as kids. Even when we drifted apart in college. Even last night when you told me to man up, when what I really needed was for someone, anyone, to see through the facade I've maintained for so long. I'm just so tired of fighting this alone. Take care of yourself. And maybe, sometimes, let yourself be taken care of too. Eric. The letter fell from my trembling hands. He had tried to tell me, had gathered his courage, pushed through his natural reticence, found the vulnerability to admit he wasn't okay, had reached out in the only way he knew how, with words that must have cost him immeasurable effort. I don't feel like myself lately. Such a simple statement. Such a monumental admission from my brother, who had always been the strong one in different ways than me. Emotionally reserved, self-sufficient, independent to a fault. And my response? Man up. 2 words that dismissed his struggle. 2 words that reinforced the toxic message we'd both internalized from childhood. That real men don't admit weakness, don't ask for help, don't burden others with their pain. 2 words that may have been the final push toward a decision he had been contemplating for longer than I knew. In the quiet of his apartment, surrounded by evidence of the brother I thought I knew but clearly didn't understand, I finally broke. Not the controlled grief I had maintained for our parents' sake, not the stoic face I had presented to relatives and friends, but raw, primal anguish that came from the deepest part of me. Because the truth, the devastating, too late truth, was that what Eric had needed that night wasn't a platitude or dismissal, wasn't advice or solutions or minimization of his feelings. What he had needed, what might have made all the difference, was simply a hug. Physical confirmation that he wasn't alone. Silent acknowledgement that his pain was seen, was valid, was worthy of attention. The simplest human connection. The most basic expression of love and acceptance. The wordless assurance that would have cost me nothing to give and might have meant everything for him to receive. Man up. Instead, I offered those 2 damning words. Words that embodied everything wrong with how we'd been taught to be men, to be brothers, to be human beings in pain. Words I would give anything to take back. It's been 9 months since that February evening. 9 months of carrying those 2 cruel words with me. Of hearing them echo in quiet moments, of imagining all the different ways that conversation could have gone if I had simply reached across the table and offered my brother what he was really asking for. Fall has settled over the city, leaves turning golden and red before dropping to the sidewalks. Eric loved autumn, the colors inspiring his most vibrant paintings, the crisp air energizing him after summer's heat, the transformation of the familiar world into something new and beautiful. I visit his grave weekly, though I know he isn't really there. Bring fresh flowers even as I hear his voice in my head teasing me for the sentimentality. Talk to him about my week, my thoughts, all the things I should have said when he was alive to hear them. I miss you, I tell the silent stone. I'm sorry I failed you when it mattered most. The cemetery offers no absolution, no comfort beyond the quiet dignity of its grounds. But the ritual helps, somehow, gives structure to grief that otherwise threatens to consume everything else. I've changed in ways both visible and invisible. Friends notice my increased emotional openness, my willingness to ask for help, my habit of checking in on people with genuine attention rather than obligatory inquiries. My relationship with Melissa has deepened as I've learned to share burdens I once would have carried alone. My parents have changed too, their grief transforming them in different ways. Dad, suddenly looking decades older, has become almost compulsively communicative, calling daily, expressing affection awkwardly but sincerely, asking questions about feelings he never acknowledged before. Mom channels her pain into action, establishing a foundation in Eric's name focused on mental health awareness for young men, trying to create meaning from meaningless loss. We didn't know how to talk about these things, Dad said during a recent visit, the two of us sitting on his back porch as evening fell. My father never once told me he loved me, never asked how I felt about anything. I thought I was doing better with you boys, but you did your best, I offered. The absolution automatic. He shook his head, eyes fixed on the darkening horizon. No, I did what was comfortable, what I understood. I never learned the language Eric needed to hear, never created space for certain kinds of truth, and now I'll never get the chance to learn. The simple honesty of his self-assessment broke something open in me. Not fresh grief, but a new understanding of how patterns perpetuate across generations until someone finds the courage to break them. I told him to man up, I confessed, the words bitter on my tongue. That last night, when he tried to tell me something was wrong, that's what I said to him, the last real thing I ever said to my brother. Dad's hand found my shoulder, squeezing with surprising strength. Then we both failed him, in the exact same way. We sat in silence as stars emerged above us, two men finally learning a language that came too late for the one who needed it most. My therapist, yes, I started seeing one, something I would have mocked before, calls it complicated grief, intensified by guilt and what-ifs. She says I'm not just mourning Eric, but also mourning the conversation we never had, the connection I failed to offer, the brother I could have been if I'd recognized what was happening. You cannot change that night, she reminds me in our sessions, but you can allow it to change how you show up for others going forward. So I'm trying. I listen more carefully now when friends speak, attuned to the subtext beneath casual comments. I ask follow-up questions when someone says they're fine, in a tone that suggests otherwise. I offer physical comfort, a hand on a shoulder, a hug when appropriate, instead of empty words or dismissive advice. Small changes perhaps, but they represent a fundamental shift in how I understand human connection, in how I recognize that sometimes people don't need solutions or advice or platitudes. Sometimes they just need presence, attention, contact. Sometimes they just need a hug. 3 months ago, I made a decision I'd been considering since reading Eric's letter. I left my position at the financial firm where I'd spent the last decade climbing the ladder, chasing promotions, prioritizing success over everything else. Are you sure about this? My boss asked, bewildered by what seemed like a sudden change of direction. You're on the partnership track. Another year, maybe 2. Partnership, the goal I'd been pursuing single-mindedly. The achievement that had made it easy to be late to Friday beers, to check my watch during conversations, to tell my brother to man up rather than really hearing what he was trying to tell me. I'm sure, I told him. My priorities have changed. I've started consulting part-time for nonprofits focused on youth mental health, using my financial expertise to help organizations like the foundation my mother established. The pay is significantly less, the prestige non-existent by my previous standards. But the work has meaning, purpose, direction. Feels like something Eric might have been proud of. In his apartment, which I took over when the lease came up for renewal, unable to bear the thought of strangers living in those rooms, I've created a small studio space. Not that I have any of Eric's artistic talent, but I've found an unexpected solace in trying to learn the basics of painting, in understanding a piece of his world that I never bothered to explore while he was alive. His easel stands by the window where the light is best. His brushes, meticulously cleaned and stored in mason jars, wait for hands more skilled than mine. His sketchbooks fill a bookshelf, a visual diary of his interior life that I now study like sacred texts, looking for clues I missed, for signs I should have seen. 1 month ago, Ryan, Eric's roommate and closest friend, stopped by the apartment to drop off the last of Eric's things that had been at his studio. A box of supplies, reference books, photographs Eric had used for inspiration. I kept finding pieces of him, Ryan explained, standing awkwardly in the entryway, clearly uncomfortable being back in the space they had shared. Every time I thought I had gathered everything, something else would turn up, like he's still there somehow. I understood exactly what he meant. The persistent presence of absence, the way ordinary objects become relics when they're all that remains. I should have seen it coming, Ryan said suddenly, setting the box on the coffee table. I lived with him, saw him every day, watched him withdraw, sleep more, eat less. But he always had a plausible explanation, always managed to convince me he was just tired or busy or fighting a cold. He was good at that, I agreed. The convincing. Ryan nodded, eyes moving around the apartment, not settling anywhere. The night after you guys had beers, that Friday, he seemed different, more resolved somehow. I thought it meant he was feeling better, that whatever had been weighing on him had lifted. He paused, swallowing hard. I actually remember thinking, whatever his brother said must have helped. The words hit like a physical blow. While I had been at dinner with Melissa, congratulating myself on setting boundaries around work, on being present for my girlfriend, Eric had returned home, carrying the weight of my dismissal, my failure to recognize his pain. Had that been the final confirmation he needed? The last evidence that no one could really see him, really hear him, really understand? I didn't help him, I said, the confession scraping my throat raw. He tried to tell me something was wrong, and I told him to man up. Those were basically my last words to him. Ryan was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, he stepped forward and pulled me into a tight hug. He wouldn't want you carrying that forever, Ryan said, his voice muffled against my shoulder. He'd forgive you. He always did. The embrace lasted longer than the typical brief hug between men, the kind with back slaps to establish appropriate distance, to affirm that this contact doesn't challenge our masculinity. For once, I didn't pull away first, didn't retreat to safer emotional territory. In that moment, I understood something I had been missing, that Eric's legacy wasn't just the art he created or the lives he touched, but also this, the permission to connect authentically, to offer comfort directly, to acknowledge pain without trying to fix it. Last week was Eric's birthday. He would have been 33. In previous years, I would have called, sent a gift card, maybe met for drinks if our schedules aligned. Perfunctory acknowledgement, brotherly obligation fulfilled. This year, I gathered a small group of people who had loved him, our parents, Ryan, a few close friends, his art professor from college who had become a mentor. We met at Murphy's, at our usual corner table, and shared stories about Eric that made us laugh and cry in equal measure. Remember when he decided to learn violin at 25? Ryan said, shaking his head. The neighbors filed 3 noise complaints before he admitted he might not be musically gifted. Or the time he entered that chili cook-off, I added, and somehow confused sugar for salt. Sweetest damn chili I've ever tasted. He brought me soup when I had pneumonia last year, Eric's friend Sophia said quietly. Came over every day for a week to check on me, even though he was on deadline for that hospital installation. Said it was what friends do. Story after story, building a more complete picture of my brother than I had ever held while he was alive. His generosity, his stubbornness, his loyalty, his struggles. As the evening wound down, our parents left for their hotel. Friends drifted away in pairs and groups, until only Ryan and I remained at the table. "He asked me once," Ryan said, staring into his nearly empty glass, "what I thought would happen if he just stopped pretending to be okay. If he admitted how hard things had gotten. I told him people who loved him would want to know, would want to help." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine. He said, "Maybe, or maybe they'd just tell me to get over it." The words settled between us, heavy with implication. "I proved him right," I said finally. Ryan shook his head. "Or maybe he never really gave you the chance to prove him wrong. Maybe I don't feel like myself was as far as he could go, even with you. Especially with you." "What do you mean, especially?" "Your opinion mattered most," Ryan said simply. "Your approval, your respect. Disappointing you or appearing weak to you. That was his greatest fear. Always had been, from what he told me. I hadn't known. Had never imagined that my opinion carried such weight with my younger brother. Had always assumed our relationship was balanced, mutual, equal in influence. How wrong I had been. How blind to the dynamics that had shaped our interactions from childhood. Me as the standard setter, the achiever, the one who defined what success looked like. Eric measuring himself against my yardstick, and always in his own mind, coming up short. No wonder Man Up had cut so deeply. It wasn't just dismissal from a friend or family member. It was confirmation from the person whose judgment mattered most that his feelings were insufficient, inappropriate, unmanly. That his struggle was a failure of character rather than a genuine need for connection. That night, after leaving Murphy's, I walked through the city streets for hours, retracing routes Eric and I had taken on countless Friday evenings. Past the art museum where he'd had his first gallery showing. Past the coffee shop where he sketched on Sunday mornings. Past the park where we'd played as children during visits to our grandparents. In my pocket, I carried a small, smooth stone from his studio, one he'd collected on our last family vacation to the lake house, the kind he always kept on his desk for what he called tactile grounding when he was working through creative problems. "I miss you," I said aloud as I walked, not caring if passers-by thought I was strange for talking to the night air. "I'm sorry I didn't understand what you were really asking for. I'm sorry I offered judgment when you needed compassion." The city continued around me, indifferent to my grief, my regret, my belated understanding. This morning, I met with the director of a youth mentoring program that Eric had volunteered with occasionally. They're establishing a new initiative focused on emotional intelligence for teenage boys, teaching the skills our generation largely lacked, creating space for vulnerability that we never experienced. "We'd like to name the program after your brother," the director explained, as we sat in her cramped office. "He had a way with the kids who were struggling the most. Somehow knew how to reach them without pushing." "He would be honored," I said, meaning it. "What can I do to help?" "We need male mentors," she replied directly. "Men who can model healthy emotional expression. Who can show these boys that strength isn't about suppressing feelings but about acknowledging them appropriately." The irony wasn't lost on me, that I, who had failed so catastrophically in this exact area, would now be teaching others. But perhaps that's exactly why I might be effective, because I understand the cost of emotional illiteracy in a way I never could have before. "I'm in," I told her. "Whatever you need." As I left her office, stepping into the bright fall morning, I felt Eric's presence more strongly than I had in months. Not the heavy absence I've carried since February, but something lighter, a sense of continuation, of purpose, of meaning extracted from meaningless loss. I still carry those two damning words with me. Man up. The last real advice I gave my brother. Still hear them in quiet moments. Still imagine all the ways I could have responded differently. Still wish for one more chance to reach across a table at Murphy's and offer what he was really asking for. But now I also carry something else. The determination that his struggle will matter, that his pain will serve a purpose, that other young men might learn what we never did, that vulnerability isn't weakness, that asking for help isn't failure, that sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is admit he's not okay. And sometimes the most important thing we can offer each other isn't advice or solutions or minimization. Sometimes it's just presence. Attention, understanding. Sometimes it's just a hug.